This presentation, titled Remote Auditing 1 Year Later, What We've Learned, comes to us from Denise Robitaille. Denise is the chair of ISO PC 302, the project committee that revised ISO 19011, which provides guidance on auditing. She's an active member of ISO TC 176 Auditing Practice Group that develops papers providing guidance on auditing. Denise has participated internationally in standards development for more than 18 years and is a fellow of the American Society for Quality, as well as an Exemplar Global Certified Lead Assessor. She's internationally recognized for her work and is a frequent speaker at conferences. Denise has authored a dozen books, including The 9 Keys to Successful Audits, and she's contributed more than 100 articles to various publications on a variety of quality-related topics. She continues to help companies achieve ISO 9001 registration and to improve their quality management systems. And with that, take it away, Denise.
Thanks very much, Mike, and hello, everyone. So let us talk about what has happened with remote auditing in the last year. This is something that was foisted on a lot of people, and let's see how we did. So a little bit of background. How did we get here? So remote auditing had been around for a while, but it really got catapulted into popularity by the global pandemic. As we know, with COVID, so many things in our lives went remote, and auditing was one of them. So the other thing to remember, though, is that this ability to do these audits was also serendipitously enabled by innovations in web conferencing and other technology. So regardless of what happened before, regardless of what happened before, if this innovation had not occurred, we would not have been able to respond to this global pandemic and continue to be able to do audits. So, but this whole thing of doing remote audits has really been around for decades. So the groundwork really had been laid. In some industries, particularly things like software development, where you had a lot of remote collaborations, these kind of audits were actually already being done. So this thing was not 100% in its infancy, but pandemic, that just skyrocketed the importance of all of us being able to now conduct these audits remotely. One of the interesting things about this is that it was also the right moment at which to do this. So what enabled it was we had better web conferencing apps, we now have smartphones, we have the cloud, we had all of these things that we could utilize that we didn't used to have in order to be able to do these audits. But the other thing is that a lot of our processes are a lot more remote than they were in years gone by. So one of the big wins out of this is that we learned very quickly that there are some processes that actually benefit from our ability to be able to use remote auditing techniques in order to be able to really be able to do a very effective assessment of the effectiveness of those processes. And remote auditing actually enables that. It's really interesting and very informative to be able to assess some of these processes at a distance, because we're able to better see what are some of the constraints, what are some of the benchmarks, what are the things that work really well, and what other things create constraints in organizations' ability to be able to serve their customers, to be able to effectively implement their processes. So a lot of things just came together at the right moment in time. So the genie is out of the lamp. There is no going back. We are not going back to a time where there is not going to be any remote auditing. Remote auditing is here to stay. And we have to look at what happened in the past. We have to look at the constraints that we had, the challenges that we had, and we have to look at the benefits that can be derived and put together our plans going forward. But there is no everything's going to go back to normal or to something that approximates a normal, or what people are referring to as the new normal. All of those things, regardless of what we have 12 months going forward, there will be remote audits. We have to accept that fact and plan for it and figure out how to experience the best benefit out of what we have learned in the last 12 months. So what are some of the things that we learned? Well, first of all, let's talk about the problems that we encountered and the risks that we encountered, and how many of those that we had. So access to the appropriate technology really was all over the board. You had companies that had all of the technology that they needed. They had good web conferencing platforms. Everything was there. And then you had others who really, really struggled with it. In some instances, I had audits that I did where all we had was a phone line and email, and people were transmitting back and forth dozens and dozens and dozens of PDFs of documents and records. Very, very, very clunky, but that's one of the tools, because that was all that some companies had. They had not advanced to the point of having web conferencing. There are some companies who still are resistant and do not want to participate in any kind of web conferencing programs at all. The other thing is that we found is that there's a whole variety of different web conferencing apps out there, and that they don't all work equally well. And the thing with auditors is that over time, different companies would request that you use their programs or their platforms. I ended up with 6 different web conferencing platforms spread over 3 different devices that I have. And I finally had to say stop, because I just could not put in any more of them, because they actually, in some cases, interfered with some of my other programs. And the other thing was that in some instances, the companies with some of these programs were actually putting in some updates that were creating, other issues. The other thing with this is bandwidth. I've had audits where there have been organizations who have 2 or 3 people on a particular interview, and they're in different locations, and all of a sudden the system crashes because they simply don't have the bandwidth for it. So, these are technology issues that have arisen. Some of them are a matter of choice. Some of them are a matter of money, because having really good web conferencing programs, there's some free stuff out there, there's some cheap stuff out there, but if you are a large corporation and you have multiple sites, then you start investing money to have something that is well integrated into the rest of your system. And you have bandwidth issues. So you have all of these things that you have to recognize as problems that have arisen. And how do we address these? What are some of the things that we need to do in order to be able to ensure that our audits are going to be effective? The other thing that we learned is that auditees' agility to deal with that technology is all over the board. I had one audit I conducted 2 weeks ago, and the company had so little experience with using, in this particular case, it was Zoom, and they had no other web conferencing program, and they only used Zoom very, very occasionally for conversations with some of their customers. That was all they had. They knew nothing about screen sharing. Many of their people had not utilized any of this technology, and I spent about 45 minutes of the audit doing tutorials on, this is how you use Zoom, and these are the buttons that you're going to push, and this is how you do your screen sharing, and then having people go offline, and then having to go get the folks from IT because things weren't working. That wastes a lot of time. And audits, we have audit schedules, and auditors know we have a day and a half, for example, to do an audit, and that's all of the time that we have, and we cannot afford to be losing half an hour, 45 minutes with people who are fumbling and struggling with this technology. So we have to address that up front. And we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the things that you do to prep ahead of time that address these constraints and these problems that have arisen. Other problems, and I don't think that these are going to go away. It's a matter of addressing these again. You have issues with screen sharing of customer information. You have some companies who have non-disclosure agreements that don't allow for the sharing of that information. You might be able to go on site and to view it, but to transmit this electronically, to do screen sharing, or to have PDFs that are sent is something that is prohibited by the contracts that they have with their customers. That seriously limits your ability to be able to audit certain processes. Other things have to do with permissions. Some organizations have extremely robust securities and firewalls, and they prevent the transmission of some of this information, or the number of terminals or computers within their organization that are able to do screen sharing is limited. So we have all of these things, and these, unlike the ones where it's a matter of not having the technology, it's a matter of having the permissions, because as we know, and we learned early on with some of the issues that some of the large web conferencing platforms had, is there are large issues with hacking and with breaches of security. And companies rightfully should be concerned about that. The other thing is that as the auditor, you have to make sure that you have a good firewall and you have a good system, because you have to be able to, during the course of your opening meeting, for example, reassure the auditee that when they engage in either screen sharing with you, or when they send you PDFs of documents, or whatever format, whether it's Word documents or Excel spreadsheets, that information that they have sent you is protected, and that you do not have a porous firewall, and that they do not have to be concerned that engaging in this audit with you is going to result in a loss of confidential information or any breach of securities that they have. So you really, really have to be on top of that, and it's important to reassure the auditee, because they're going to be very cautious about what they share with you if you have not given them adequate reassurance that their information is going to be protected. So what are some of the other problems that have arisen? Distractions. So the big thing with this is, if you are on site and you are sitting in someone's office and someone wants to speak to the person that you're interviewing, and they walk in the door and they see that they are in a meeting with you, that individual will back out and say, "I'm sorry, I didn't realize that you were in a meeting," and they'll go away. So the distraction is very, very, very minimal. Unfortunately, when people are teleconferencing or web conferencing, people are more apt to come in, and it takes them sometimes a couple of minutes to realize that they may not intrude, they may not interrupt the conversation that we're having. So you're more apt to have interruptions and distractions when you have a remote auditing experience. So you've got to be aware of that. You want to make sure that your auditee is aware of that, and that you let them know ahead of time that this is something they need to pay attention to. The other thing that you want them to consider, again, going back to the confidentiality thing, is that oftentimes they are in rooms where if voices get beyond a certain decibel, they're going to be heard outside. And if they are sharing proprietary information that they do not want to have shared with everyone in the company, then they've got to be careful to make sure that the door is closed and that the the conversation is moderated. It's at a lower volume. The second distraction is noise, and this is particularly the case when you are out in the manufacturing area or if you have to go outside. But the manufacturing areas are the single biggest heavy hitter in this category. And if you are doing a recertification audit and the expectation is that you are going to audit all of the processes, including manufacturing processes, this can be a challenge, and you have to deal with this up front. You've got certain operations, you've got bending operations, you've got metal stamping operations, many of these operations where you have highly automated things, where there is a lot of noise. And you still have to go out into that area. You have to be able to observe that area, and you have to be able to interview the machine operators. So the thing is how do you do that? If it's a situation where they are able to halt the machine temporarily so that you can interview the operator, that's actually the best scenario that you can have. So the operator can show you their documents, they can show you their routers and their packages, they can hold their instruments that they do for their random in-process inspections. They can hold that up to the camera so that you can see the calibration tag and you record that. They can pan out so you can see their work area and see that they have the tools that they need, that, for example, they've got the bin where they put parts that are segregated because they're either questionable or are going to need to be scrapped. But in that particular instance, for you to be able to do that, the machines have to stop. In some instances, that's not possible. So you just ask them to get as far away from the machine as they can without leaving their area. Unfortunately, one of the things that happens is that you'll end up with people who take the smartphone and put it up to their ear so that they can hear you, and you get some interesting shots that you'd rather not see. But anticipate the fact and talk with whoever your contact is ahead of time to figure out how many different ways you can mitigate the problems that you're going to have with noise so that you can actually hear things. And you generally know ahead of time what kind of organization you're auditing, what kind of machinery they've got, so you're going to know that they've got to have a plan. So don't do this the day before, do this a couple of weeks ahead of time to give them the opportunity to think about how they're going to manage this. The next thing in terms of environment that's a problem are that a lot of remote locations means people that are at home. And you have people who are working from home who are like design engineers, individuals who are accustomed to working at home who've already been part remote. And the environments that they've created are fairly amenable to the audits. Unfortunately, you have a lot of other folks for whom this working from home is new. You have I've got one organization who has that I audited, and they have all of their call center that used to be in one place. So you're talking about 40 people. 40 people took their computers home, and they're all networked in, and that call center is now spread over 40 domiciles across multiple different towns in a particular region. In that particular instance, people this is something that was new to them. So, for example, you're occasionally going to have issues with children. I personally am very tolerant of that. I understand that. I had an audit where a woman had an 18-month-old child and someone else was watching the child, and the child said, I started to get very fussy, and she said, "Excuse me, I need 15 minutes to go and be with my son." That is acceptable. I mean, that stuff like that happens. Expect it to happen. Build some time into your schedules in order to accommodate that. However, other people have dogs that they think can sit in the room and create serious distractions. That I have a lot less sympathy for, and I'll just say, no, the dog has to leave. Remember, the auditor manages the audit, and that includes issues like environment. So make sure that that environment that you're auditing in is relatively distraction-free as much as can be accommodated. We're still finding that there's some, if you have special environments like clean rooms, it's still really challenging to be able to audit those. You've got to be a lot more, have greater agility with cameras and or tablets or other things so that you can actually pan in and see what's happening in a clean room. In some instances, you arrive at the conclusion that this is not a process that can be audited remotely, not successfully. You can do, a cursory audit with the expectation that, when things get better, this is one of the ones that is not going to be able to continue to be done regularly as a remote event. And that goes for the manufacturing example as well. And that's one of the things that we're going to find going forward. And we're going to talk about the hybridization of your audit programs. Where we're going to go, one of the things that we've learned is that not everything can always be audited remotely. Some things you can do in a pinch, some things you can do maybe once and do the best you can with it, but quite frankly, over time you're going to realize that there are some things that cannot be done successfully. The other thing that we found as a problem is, your confidence level that the evidence that you're being presented is actually true of the conditions that you're looking at. You want to, you're concerned about things like the homogeneity of the samples that are provided. Since you're remote, you have less opportunity to, for example, be on site and just point at things and say, I want to see that one and that one, and go down, a list, unless they're sharing their screen and you can select it that way. Without having them be in the driver's seat and selecting the samples. A lot of people, they do the right thing. They will take a true random sample so that you have that homogeneity, that over the course of a group of samples, you will be able to find enough examples that show that the process is consistently well controlled. However, there is a risk that you're going to have some organizations who will choose very, very pristine samples. And it's easier for them to do that remotely. One of the things that you do in order to mitigate that is to request a larger sample size from the outset. And what we learned from that is one of the problems that arose is, and it arises all the time, is that you ask for a smaller sample set. So you ask for 5 instead of 7. And then you get the samples, and first of all, it either becomes clear that you don't have something that has that homogeneous quality to it, or you have a lot of anomalies in there. Let's say we're talking about shipping documents, and you find that 3 of them are not true customer orders, but samples that a salesman requested be shipped out. Well, that's like 3 out of 7 of your samples, or if you started with only 5, then more than half of your sample size is not representative of a true process. So you have to pause the audit and ask them to get more samples, or on the fly say, I'm going to sit here and wait while you go grab some more. That eats up time. The upside to that is that if they feel rushed, then they might be less apt to gather another pristine sample. But you start by, one of the things, how you mitigate part of this issue is to grab larger samples. The other thing is that, that ability to observe a work area. Again, when you're going out there, and we'll use the manufacturing example again, they're more likely to choose the work areas that are cleaner, that have things that are better organized, where the operator is better able to explain things. So in that particular instance, you might actually say, well, I need to see one more. I need to see one that represents a different operation. And you try and get away from this thing where the auditee is basically trying to drive the audit and present everything in the most favorable light, which is not something, that it's human nature. People tend to want to put forth their best foot, and and to show themselves in the best light. But we've got to see something that is representative. So make sure that you anticipate some of these things, you plan ahead of time, and also plan the kind of questions that you're going to ask that allow you to get there. Because people are going to get impatient with this. This is new to these folks. It's new to auditors, but with this, we're doing a lot more of this. They're not doing these remote events all of the time. So this is really, really, really new to them. And you have to deal with that as well. So how do you really begin to mitigate the risks around this and address these so that you can have a successful audit? Discuss your telecommunications options ahead of time. This is both the phone lines you're going to be using as well as the web conferencing that you're going to be using. The other thing with this is anticipate that the day that you go to sign in, either Zoom or GoToMeeting or one of these folks is going to have a screen that pops up and says, oh, it's time to update. And if you've only allowed yourself 3 minutes before the start of the audit, you're going to be spending the next 15 minutes trying to update because they're not giving you an option to postpone this update and they want it now. Do not allow the auditee to drive you towards some obscure web conferencing app or document sharing app that you are unfamiliar with and you're uncomfortable about downloading to your computer. You have to use this computer for multiple different audits, and you have to protect it from some things that are going to cause your system to go awry, things that are going to cause interference with other systems. So you do get to drive the bus on this. There are enough recognized web conferencing apps out there without people defaulting to things that you haven't heard about. Make sure that both the auditor and the auditee have the agility with the technology and the equipment, and ask the auditee to make sure that the key people that you're going to be interviewing, who, for example, are going to need to do screen sharing, that they have had a little bit of training up front on how to do this. Doesn't have to be complicated, just let them show. If you have the chance, it's nice to do a dry run. I had one client who did a dry run with me last week, and it made all the difference. They checked everything. They checked the screen sharing. They checked how many different people they could have online. All of this, and it was very helpful. You don't always have that option. Anytime that you do have that option to do a dry run, avail yourself of that opportunity. Remember time zones with this remote stuff. We've gotten really comfortable where we fly to an audit. Now we're doing things and, you're on the East Coast and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I have to remember. Or you're doing an audit and the registrar has decided that, now that we're remote, you can do the audits in Brazil and the one in California and the one on the East Coast. And you try and bring some efficiency to that and try and buy some time or to manage the time best. And if you're not really on top of this whole thing of time zones, for example, with Brazil, they have multiple time zones, and I grabbed the wrong one for one particular audit, and it got a little crazy. So check into the time zones, remember that. Ahead of time, verify those permissions and securities, and make sure that your audit, the person who is managing the audit at the client or the supplier, because we're doing both, we're doing through 3 internal, supplier, and third-party audits like certification audits. So for those 2 external ones, the supplier audits and the certification audits, make sure that your contacts loop in their IT folks for things like permission and security. Because one of the problems that arises is that the day of the audit, if they have not been included, you become very quickly and painfully aware of the fact that their system does not accommodate the sharing of some information that you expected you were going to be able to use in order to be able to conduct your audit. So let them know ahead of time, advise them that they need to ensure that their IT folks are looped into any of these conversations. Make sure that you establish contingency for when the technology fails. And the easiest thing to do that is to make sure that you've got somebody's cell phone number. And you agree during the opening meeting, folks, this is the cell phone number that I'm going to call in the event that everything crashes, so that we can come up with plan B. And the other thing is, ask for some documents ahead of time before you start, and review those documents so that if things go awry, you'll actually have some things to talk about if you have to get on a phone call because all of a sudden the technology has crashed on you. Okay, so during the audit, you have a lot of people, and this is still the case, people who are uncomfortable. There are many organizations who do not have cameras on all of the computers. They have a lot of them who do not want their employees to utilize the cameras if they actually do have them. So you're dealing with the disembodied voice, or they can't see me. That is very unsettling, because not only do you have all of this, the discomfort that you've had over the years with audits, with the auditor being there present so you can actually see them, you can see their facial expressions, and you can converse with them. One of the things that I miss terribly with the need to be masked in so many different environments, not just auditing, is the fact that so much of our expression is lost behind the mask, that we rely on as cues, and actually part and parcel of our conversations. So we've got this constraint, is that we've just got the voice. The other thing is that we've lost that ability to just point at things. So you're looking at a document together, and you're just pointing at something. So if someone is sharing their screen, instead of being able to just point at the screen and say, oh, I want to see, we're looking at the log, and I want to see number 7 on your log here, and you just point at it, and it's really fast and it's done. You can't do that anymore. So you're fumbling with trying to very clearly describe what it is that you need to see. We are looking at the Excel spreadsheet. Please go down to line number 8, and we're looking over at the 4th column. Please explain what that means. So it's going to take you a little bit longer, because you have to speak clearly and you have to be very deliberate in what you ask, because it's so easy for people to misunderstand what you are requesting. And so you spend a lot of time saying, no, not that one. No, I want this one. No, I need that one. Just so be very, very clear. One of the things that auditors have always over the years used in order to substantiate their ability to observe a process is the whole thing of seeing things on the periphery. So you see, for example, that shelf where they're putting material that is questionable and needs to be checked. You're able to look in any particular area and see what is happening on that periphery. Where are resources that are needed? Where are other people? Where is one thing in relation to another? And you don't have that anymore. So you've lost that, and you look for something in order to fill that gap. So you need to compensate for those missing visual and audio cues. So take your time. You need to be patient. Again, you've got folks who are not comfortable with this technology. And so not only do you have to be patient, you also have to be a little gentle, because you still have to get the job done, but you're going to have to say, I understand that you have shown me this and this, but this is the other thing that I need. And that goes to the next bullet, which is to be tenacious, because people are going to get upset. People are going to become impatient. Despite all of that, you have a job to do, and that is to assess conformance to defined requirements. And you still have to look at inputs, and you have to look at documents, and you have to observe the process, and you have to conduct your interview, and you have to see the output of the process, and you have to see the records that demonstrate conformance to that, and have people explain that to you. All of that still has to happen. And sometimes you're going to have to say multiple times, I know, I understand what you've given me, I'm sorry, but I need to see one more thing. One of the things that we've already talked about is to ask for additional samples and ask for them up front. And that really, in many instances, is really going to help out overall. All of this having been said, take breaks. Take a lot of breaks. That breaks to a couple of things. First of all, it just reduces the stress. People have bio breaks. It's a lot easier if you're in somebody's facility to say, excuse me, I need the restroom. Excuse me, I gotta go. For some reason, when you're on a web platform, when you're doing a Zoom meeting or a WebEx meeting, if for some reason we're not apt to say, I'm sorry, I gotta cut away. I need 10 minutes here. The other thing those breaks allow you to do is to have them go and collect some of those additional samples that you need. So expect that you're going to take that break to give everybody a minute to go back, check their email, to take care of bio needs, and also to get those samples. So don't make it a 5-minute break, make it a 15-minute break. Give them the time to do it. Or else you're going to come back in 5 minutes and they're not going to be there. And then they're apologizing because they're late, and then they're uncomfortable again. So take breaks and make the breaks at least 15 minutes. Sometimes they may take longer. I had one instance where I said, we're going to take 15 minutes. And she explained to me that the things that I needed to see, she was going to have to go to another building. And it took her 5 minutes to get to that other building and then get the information, come back. It was ridiculous. So it's like, okay, we're going to take a half-hour break, but we're going to have to take a little bit less time for lunch because we still have to get everything done. So we've learned this, and it's something that you learn with practice over time, all of these different things that have occurred and that we need to compensate for in order to be able to get the job done. So we talked before about the fact that I used the word hybridization. Going forward, these audits are not going away. We have discovered that there's some things that we can do very, very successfully remotely. Processes, management review. I can do 75% of management review by looking at the records of the management review and all of the supporting data if it's well presented. And then I have a 45-minute interview with the managers and with the CEO or whatever higher level individuals in the company about what I observed. So instead of it being a 2.5-hour event spent on, in someone's office or in the conference room that they have, in some cases, begrudgingly ceded to the need for the auditor to have a space, it's half an hour, 45 minutes because you've looked at all the stuff ahead of time. Internal audit, same thing. Design and development. All of this stuff is now for some companies. In some instances, all of the stuff is electronic. You do have some companies who still have drawings and still have a lot of paper, and they have binders, etc. For those cases, that remote event is a bit of a challenge. But if they've got everything, if they've got the SolidWorks and they've got the vault and they've got all their engineering files, you're doing screen sharing and they're showing you their process and they're showing you their Gantt charts and everything else. You can do that. There's screen sharing, and between the whole thing, they're going to, it's really easy in some instances to do that entire process remotely. Other things, if you're with suppliers, you can have some suppliers where you're looking at, if they're supplier audits, you have some suppliers where you absolutely have to be on site, and then other suppliers where it's a lot less critical and you can do it remotely, and your level of confidence is not diminished. Being able to do a distributor remotely. I mean, basically, they're not doing any manufacturing. You want to see that their warehouse is clean. That's about as sophisticated as you need to get in terms of looking out at the plant, if you will. And, other things that you look at are risks. Some processes are more stable. And then other things, obviously, geography, permissions, ability to be on site for some. Some people will say, you can't come on site, but we'll do some web conferencing stuff with you. So these are all the things that you can consider when you hybridize your audit programs, be it first, second, or third party audits. You have the opportunity to do this. And let me give you an example of how that might look for an internal audit program. So in this particular case, we are looking at an organization that has 2 manufacturing plants and they have a separate warehouse. And you look through and they have set something up where they have some things that are done on site all the time. Then you have some things where they alternate, where one time it's done remotely and the other time it's done on site. Like if you look at preventive maintenance, in some cases they're just looking at all of the records having to do with preventive maintenance. They're looking at the schedule, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next time they go on site because they actually want to see more of, for example, the lockout tagouts that they might have to implement when they're doing preventive maintenance, and how well they're doing that, and who are the individuals who are responsible for that, and being able to interview them on site. All of these different things, as you go all the way through this, you can see some things you want to do them remotely, you want to do them on site. So for this particular scenario, let us say that you have auditors who travel between plants in order to conduct some of these audits, so that you have really good objectivity in your audits. They're going to save a lot of money in terms of, even if it's just mileage to drive to the next town, and the time that the auditor spends getting from one site to the other, and those hours can be allocated to other work or to other audits. So this is just an example of how you might have a hybrid situation where some of things are done remotely, some things done on site. For certification audits, I can foresee in the future that there are some instances where, approximately a third of things can be done remotely, which might mean that instead of an auditor having 2 hotel nights, they only have 1, or instead of having 3 hotel nights, they only have 2. And, you do that, 2 or 3 dozen times, and it starts to add up in terms of the money that is saved. But with this, as with anything else, you've got to monitor it and make sure that you're still getting the results that you need. So what are some of the benefits that we've learned that we can derive from the use of remote auditing technology? Well, top of the list is that we learned that, we can protect people's health and safety. The big thing, the elephant in the room this past year was the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's what we wanted to protect people from. But other instances is, if you've got environments that are not particularly safe and you can audit those effectively remotely, then you diminish the risk of harm. We've talked about saving time. Most of that time is travel time. You don't save 100% of the travel time, because you have to put a little bit back in for the time that you spend trying to get the remote technology work, getting the kinks out of that, doing your dry runs and, getting everybody up to speed. But there is a big time saving to be experienced. One of the really cool things that you get to look at, especially if you've got an organization that has multiple locations, is how things are perceived from the customer's perspective. So if you are conducting an audit of a process where, for example, customers are logging in order to look at your website and be able to figure out where the specs are for products, being able to do that remotely, so that you can't walk across and go and talk to the engineers if something doesn't make sense. That's a really interesting thing, and you can, by doing that, perceive if your customers have any constraints on their ability to be able to understand what your product offerings are, or if there are some challenges that they have in being able to reach technical support if they need it. So that's a really neat, unexpected benefit, is that you really do have the chance to be so distanced from those regular resources that, you can run in and just go to somebody's office and ask them to help you out, and all of a sudden it's a little bit more difficult. You can observe how communication works between different facilities. Decreased travel expenses. And, with this one, if you're dealing with supplier audits and you decrease your supplier audits by even 30%, and you calculate, because, your suppliers are across the globe, that for each of, let's say you have 30 audits and you decrease that to 20, and for each of those 10 audits, the cost is basically about $5,000 when you figure in travel expenses, and you feel accommodations and food and anything else that comes up. You could experience a benefit to the bottom line of $40,000-$50,000. And that also, all of that time you can throw back into conducting other audits. And obviously you can find a lot of different things to do with that money. So you do have that opportunity to add more audits because they're less time consuming to do. The other thing is that it actually increases the number of auditors that you have in your auditor pool. You have a lot of people who can't travel because, they've got family constraints. There's reasons that they are not able to travel. But they're really competent, intelligent people, and this gives you the opportunity. It's twofold. They get the chance to develop some of their talents, and you get to reap the benefit of having these additional talented people in your auditor pool. And overall, it actually improves how everybody is using that technology. All this time, we are not going back. So this thing of being able to Zoom, anything that happens during that course of the audit, that screen sharing, that let's look at stuff that's on the cloud and all the different things. Everybody's going to learn how to be better at this technology for other things that exceed just the audit program. So when we look at all of this, we're looking 1 year later. So this is kind of like a very high level follow-up that we can say, we looked at what happened in the last 12 months. We've talked about some of those constraints. We've talked about some of the wonderful things that we've learned and some of the benefits that we've been able to identify. So as we're doing this, let's ask the question, how are we going to do those verifications for nonconformances that have arisen? Going forward, how are we going to do that? We tried to do it remotely. It worked or it didn't work. How are we going to do that? Getting better at things like purging electronic files. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier on is that you want to make sure that you have given the auditee the confidence that their information is protected, and when this is all over, all of their information is going to be removed from your system. This is not an easy conversation. So you're looking at your emails, then you're looking at your hard drive, then you're looking at any other media, if like you've transferred it to a flash drive because you're traveling, secondary sources that you have. Then one of the things that I forgot to do was, I dumped everything and I hit the delete key, but then I didn't go to my recycle bin, and they're still all in there. You got to get them out of the recycle bin as well. So there's a whole bunch of different places. Emails, it's not just that first email, but it could be in the email trail. So something that you thought was in only one email can be in like 2 or 3. All of these, you want to make sure that if you have proprietary information, that you learn all of the different places that it is, and that you make sure that you are most assiduous in making sure that all of those files are removed. Because frankly, you don't want the liability of having them in your system in case anything happens to your security. Do the debriefs. Talk to other people about what they've learned. You know, I've talked about all the things that I've learned and the things that have been perceived. Other people have noticed other things. Talk to them about them. Talk about the problems that have arisen within your own organization with your auditors or with the auditees. What came up and how do we fix this? And then after that, you know, adjust those plans going forward. Decide whether hybridization is a good way to go for your audit plans. What things can you audit remotely? Which ones you finally concluded you're going to have to do on site? And what are the plans you have to make going forward? And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Mike. Thanks, folks.
And thank you, Denise Robitaille, for that look at the remote auditing lessons that we learned after COVID. And that concludes this presentation.